Hey folks, I'm Chuck Black. We're doing 52 weeks of Python in 10-minute sessions. Today's topic is generators, and let's just get started. Okay, so let's talk about generators. Now, there are many features of the Python programming language that you need to become an expert in and very proficient in order to be a complete software developer in Python. Generators is not one of them. Let me put an asterisk on that. If you deal with large amounts of data, and by large amounts of data, I mean millions and billions of items of data, then you need to understand about generators. If you're not dealing with that amount of data, then possibly generators will only make your life more difficult and everybody else's life more difficult as well. I can tell you this from personal experience. Somebody used generators in my last project where it was completely unnecessary. There were only less than 100 pieces of data, and it caused the tests that we were running to get completely screwed up, and it took us a while to untangle the mess. So I'm presenting generators to you in part because somebody said at one point in time as a criticism of one of my introduction to Python courses, you can't say it's a complete Python course unless you talk about generators, to which I would say, but that's just my opinion. So I'm putting it in here. If you are not interested in this, if you start to listen to it and you say, this is really confusing, I wish I hadn't even started to listen to this, then I give you a complete authority to quit this lesson and not worry about generators until a later point in time. If you are still with me, let me tell you what generators are. Okay, now that I've scared most people away, I'm going to describe what generators are to you verbally, and I'm going to show you the code. And you're going to need to put on your thinking cap really tightly. So this is something that we've done before. I say devices equals create devices, and I go out and I'm going to create all of these devices. Remember, that's like 64,000 devices that it's going to create. And it's going to return to me a list of all of these devices that it has created. So it's going to go through and it's going to create all of them. Now compare that to this right here. I've written another function called createDevicesGen that we're going to look at in a minute. Instead of returning after it has created everything like it does here, this is going to return me something that we would call a generator. And what this generator is it's basically going to give me the first item, and then it's going to allow me to do something like this in a for loop, and I can reference that generator, and it's going to get me, as I iterate through this, the next item and the next item and the next item. So put your thinking cap on. If I have 10 items, this isn't really a value. If I have 10 million items, clearly calling this is going to create 10 million items. It might break my memory and I might not be able to do what I need to do. In fact, I ran into a situation like this when I was doing some of the hacking stuff at the very end of 52 Weeks of Python, the original long versions. But, and that's a situation where a generator is useful. If I only have 10 of these, it's no big deal and it makes it confusing. If I have 1 million of these, then clearly this is going to return right away, and I can iterate through step by step. So this allows me to go through my devices as if it was in a list that was pre-created, but it's not. I'm iterating it through it one at a time because this thing right here is a generator. And now I'm going to show you how a generator function actually works. So here I am at the code that we just looked at, where I'm calling createDevicesGen. That's going to return a generator that I will then use. In order to understand the difference between createDevices over here, which we've done before, and createDevicesGen, I have them next to each other. Now the important piece is right here. Basically, I'm going to be going through all of my subnets, the range of all the subnets, and then the range of all devices for every subnet. I'm going to create a device, and then I'm going to append it to created devices. And when I'm done going through this entire thing, I'm going to return this very long list in our situation of created devices. In create devices gen, my first for loop is exactly the same as this for loop. My second for loop is exactly the same as this for loop. The difference and the creating of the device is going to be exactly the same. Ignore random IP right now. That's something different. Here's my device. I'm creating a device. Now, instead of appending it to my list and continuing to iterate, I'm using this thing right here, yield, says I want you to return a generator, and the thing that I am returning that you are going to iterate on is device. Now, this is the part that's going to blow your brains, and if you are new to software development and it does blow your brain and you say, I don't understand this, and you want to say, I don't need to understand this, so I'm not going to right now, then that's perfectly okay. But if you need to understand this or you want to keep going, understand this. When I say yield device, what's going to happen is I'm going to be returning a generator. And then when I call this for loop, the first time I reference devices gen, what's going to happen is it's going to get the first item, and I'm going to do this stuff with it. This is similar stuff to what I've done before. Then when I come back up for this for loop, the next time it's going to jump back into this function. So this is totally different than anything we've seen before. If you say that's really weird, you're absolutely correct. This is a more advanced type of functionality, but it is basically it has stored where it was, and it's going to go through the next item in this for loop. And it's going to continue to do that until this for loop is exhausted. So every time it returns basically one device, so that when I am going through this in my for loop, it's exactly as if I was going through my devices, which is what I would have gotten there. It's exactly the same way, but every time I do this for loop to do the next iteration, it's going to call back into this function, and it's going to basically do this next iteration, get me the next device, and then return it. So that, in a nutshell, is what a generator function does. You will have a yield in here, and it will return a generator, and then you can iterate using that generator in a loop such as this, and every time you go through the next iteration, it will pop back into this function where it was, and it will do the next iteration of this thing, and then it will eventually end up going back here and then going through this again, and every time yielding a device. So the effect is as if I was going through a complete list of devices that have been generated beforehand, but it hasn't been generated beforehand. It's getting generated every time. That's why it's called a generator. Hopefully that made sense. If not, please let me know. I'm happy to try to explain it more. If you're curious, you can look up generators in Wikipedia or elsewhere. You will find more descriptions of what they are if you want more computer science-y description of what they do. Anyway, so that is generators. Thanks for listening.